was a 46-year-old mother of 4 children in a small boat off of Kaho'olawe Island, ready to jump into muddy, shark-filled waters and swim to an active target site. How did I get here? Well, it all happened when I made a promise to my mother when I dropped out of Stanford University at age 19 and said, I will finish college. So when my youngest daughter started preschool, I went back to the University of Hawaii in the 1970s. And if those of you may remember that time, women were fighting for equal rights at that point, as we still are. Anyway, I applied to law school, thinking that if I had a credential, I would be taken more seriously. During this same time, Native Hawaiian activists and their organization, the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, had sued the U.S. Navy to stop the bombing of Kaho'olawe. And they were looking for an attorney to work on the Aluli versus Brown case. Haunani K. Trask interviewed me. I remember her as tall, commanding, and confident, with an astounding beauty that you would see in ancient etchings. She declared to me she was Hawaiian, not American, and began to discuss the case. Haunani explained about the sexism she was experiencing in graduate school and selected me over the other 2 male applicants to represent the plaintiffs in the Aluli versus Brown case. The military had used Kaho'olawe as a target since 1942, leaving unexploded ordnance and exploded shells strewn throughout. Most vegetation and topsoil were gone, and winds had blown the rocks and the dirt into the nearshore waters. The Navy had prepared an environmental impact statement which disclosed some archaeological sites. 10 days after being sworn in to practice law, I was in federal court arguing a motion to force the Navy to complete the archaeological survey. Judge William Schwartzer granted my motion and also ordered the Navy to allow some kupuna to go with the archaeologists to document sites. We were elated, and I can remember walking out of court and saying to the Ohana members, the good news is we won. The bad news is we won. For 40 years, no civilians had been allowed on the island. How were we going to do this? Well, the Navy flatly refused to help give us transport. They refused to share any of their water that they kept on the island. They refused to share any of their food. And by being so uncooperative, they hoped that we would not be able to accomplish our access. Well, forget it, we would. We were limited, though, to 10 people, and I successfully argued that that did not include attorneys, because attorneys weren't people. What can I say? We bundled our water bottles and our gear into black trash bags, tied the tops securely so they would stay dry while we would have to pull them through the water, and set out in the early dawn for a weekend on Kaho'olawe. Knowing there were sharks in the muddy water, I jumped in with my ukana in one hand, pulling it behind me, and swam the fastest that I could ever imagine to get to shore. This was no Waikiki Beach. mud, rocks, and clawing your way up to get on to the Aina. The Ohana helped the elder Kapuna into rafts and helped them get ashore. Emmett Aluli, the lead Hawaiian activist, established protocol for everyone, and we stood on the Aina holding hands to Pule. The Navy respectfully stayed away during that time, but then they came and read us the Riot Act. No one could leave the base camp, the Kaho'olawe area, unless allowed by the commander on the island and accompanied by explosive ordnance disposal personnel, EOD. Uncle Harry Mitchell quickly established his shoreline turf and set out to fish to gather our dinner for that evening. The Kapuna, after resting, were taken to join the archaeologists and being able to start to document sites. The Ohana rightfully wanted to go up to Mo'aula, topside, because they knew that that's where archaeological sites would be located. So the Navy said, we will fly you up in helicopters. And we climbed into the helicopters in T-shirts and shorts and hiking shoes and saw before us armed troops in battle gear who stared at us like we were nuts, and we stared at them like, stop the bombing. The Aina at Mo'aula was just devastated. It was hardpan, nothing growing, and the winds would whip that red dirt into the ocean. There came time to leave, and there was only one helicopter to take people back. So I said, hey, that's great. I volunteer my co-counsel, Ron Albu, and I to walk back down with an EOD escort. So we set out on what ended up being a 3-hour hike to climb over hills, down into valleys, into gorges, back up over hills, and an hour and a half into this grueling hike back to Kaho'olawe, Ron said to me, Thielen, I'd like to kill you for doing this. We made it all the way down, and then we jumped right into the ocean, figuring that our clothes and our bodies were dirtier than the muddy waters and the shore. The Navy, what we had done by that walk was show the Navy they couldn't restrict the Ohana just to Kaho'olawe. And this was extremely important because the Ohana wanted to start to revegetate that battle-scarred island. Now they could move out other areas and do that. As access is continued, the Ohana brought people such as Jerry Santos of Olamana, and he sang us all to sleep one night as he played his music under the stars. They also began to construct a traditional halau at Kaho'olawe with supplies brought over in small boats. Meantime, I continued my negotiations with the Navy on a consent decree, insisting on expanded access time for larger numbers. And with support from the state legislature, through a resolution I drafted, I succeeded in getting Kaho'olawe placed on the National Register of Historic Places, making it the only National Register historic bombing site in the nation. Plaintiffs in the lawsuit needed to sign off on the consent decree, which Emmett did, but 2 others needed to. One was Richard Sawyer, who lived now backside on Molokai. Richard had been jailed for 6 months in federal prison for landing on Kaho'olawe to try to stop the bombing. When he came out, he left civilization and moved backside. So I got a volunteer helicopter pilot to agree to fly me over. And I put together a basket, the consent decree, a pen, which was critical, and a long, long rope. And we flew over above Richard's hale. He came running out, looking up, very surprised. I opened the helicopter door, held on for dear life, and lowered the basket down on the rope. Richard read the consent decree and my note, signed, signaled up, and off we flew back to Oahu. Then national politics took us over the finish line when President George Herbert Walker Bush signed an order stopping the bombing. The Navy agreed to sign a quitclaim deed in Hawaiian, conveying the island back to the people of Hawaii. Ceremonies were held on Maui, with Emmett arranging things with hula and chanting on a grassy field park with the water and Kaho'olawe on the distance. And I stood there and watched with deep pride as the consent decree was, as the deed was signed. I want to say mahalo, Emitaluli, mahalo, Haunani Trask, and malama, Kaho'olawe. Thank you.